Welcome to the Visual Effects Notes podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by ftrack and Action VFX. ftrack is an Academy Award-winning project management, production tracking, and media review platform for the creative industry. I've been using ftrack for the last 6 years, and it has helped me with all my visual effects projects. Forget about all the messy spreadsheets and the shared documents. ftrack is the best way to create a visual effects pipeline and to manage and communicate with your team and clients both locally and remotely. You can go to the video's description below for more information, or you can visit ftrack.com. This episode is also sponsored by Action VFX. Action VFX is the best place to get high-quality stock footage. I've used Action VFX in game cinematics, short films, trailers, and commercials. They are the best stock footage I've ever come across. You can also use the promo code Hugo's Desk for 10% off. Please visit actionvfx.com to learn more. And now on to the show.
Hi everyone, welcome to VFX Notes. I'm Ian Fales from Befores and Afters, and I'm joined by Hugo Guerra from Hugo's Desk. Hi Hugo.
Hey Ian, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Great to see you. You have stumbled upon episode 2 of our visual effects look at Doctor Strange. Episode 2, you say? Hugo, do you want to explain to our listeners and watchers what we're on about?
Well, what's happening right now is that we're using the time stone, and you're going to watch this episode forever, and you're never going to leave this place. You're going to watch Doctor Strange episodes on VFX Notes forever and ever until we bargain with you.
I'm here to bargain. Yeah.
No.
Nice.
What happens here is that we explained on the last episode that Doctor Strange, as most modern visual effects films, are just way too big for us to discuss. And so we are splitting it into sections. And go and check out our first episode where we review the film, talk about the shoot of the film, and we also talk about some key elements like the cloth and the makeup, the eyes, and we also talk about some other fun parts of the film and the car crash as well. But today, we're going to deep dive into one specific major sequence of the film. It's like a 3-minute long sequence. And this, Ian, which is this? What are we watching today? What are we talking about today?
We're talking about the Magical Mystery Tour, is how I like to describe it. It's possible that the filmmakers described it as that as well. I'm not super sure. But it's the full-on LSD mess with your mind trip that Doctor Strange takes as he's being shown, what is going on in this new world that he has suddenly discovered or is about to inhabit. And it begins, doesn't it, Hugo, after he's broken his hands and he goes, sees the Ancient One, which is Tilda Swinton. And she, starts by basically putting Strange into, I think it's called his astral form. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what she says, yeah. Obviously, this was the first time we saw this VFX. Now it's really famous. We see it all the time. We even saw it on Spider-Man as well, which is still unclear how Spider-Man actually managed to not to control the sequence as well. But yeah. This is a really beautiful effect created by Framestore. They also did that on Spider-Man as well. And that's when he leaves his body. And this is a really, really awesome sequence. It's a combination of course, CG and of course, digital double. But also they shoot parts of it as well on wires. They usually shoot it as well on motion control. I'm not entirely sure if this specific one was in motion control because I didn't see it on the behind the scenes, but I'm assuming it is motion control because you need to do the multiple passes on the set. But yeah, this is what they called it's a combination of like some kind of visual echo combined with like a trail. It's a really, really remarkable VFX created by Framestore, which involves a lot of compositing, a lot of CG as well. And yeah, I feel like it really, that's the first moment. It's a really great plot twist as well, because that's when Doctor Strange first realizes he doesn't know everything. He knows nothing at this point. It's like all of his life is like, wow, I didn't know anything about anything. And yeah, it's a really powerful sequence. I really like it.
Yes, because let's talk about that for a minute. Any big effects film needs to have this sequence where they tell the audience what the premise of some crazy thing in the universe is. Marvel is full of these, the major exposition sequences.
Yeah.
And they often use flashbacks or some sort of, like the characters look at some sort of almost like movie or, diorama or something like that. Here, to tell us about the different worlds, we actually go into the mind of Doctor Strange with the astral projection.
Yeah.
But then, not only that, she sends him into what is the magical mystery tour of multi-dimensions. In fact, I was rewatching this film the other day, Hugo, and we've sort of seen all these different dimensions now in, say, Spider-Verse and even in the other Avengers films, and there's a new Doctor Strange film that, mentions the multiverse, of course. But here's Tilda Swinton saying the word multiverse. Yeah. It's almost a bit jolting rewatching the film. Do you know what I mean? Like, I was like, oh, don't say it. We already know it exists. Anyway, that was a sort of funny reaction I had to rewatching the film a few years later.
I know exactly what you mean, because when I watched it the first time, I had no idea what they were talking about. Yeah, when I watched it on the cinema. And of course, Kevin Feige and all the people at Marvel, they know exactly what they're doing. So they were already connecting with all the other 25 films in a row until 2035. They all have the connection. So obviously, we're already watching glimpse of what we saw in Ant-Man. We are always watching glimpse of what we're going to watch on the other, potentially on the new Doctor Strange, which we haven't seen yet. So they have they know what they're talking about. But yeah, this is the first time we see it. And I guess that's the funny part to this, because most people might think it's just an LSD trip. It's just like they've had some mushrooms and they just went bananas. But every single sequence on this film has a purpose, and every single sequence on this is a 3-minute long sequence. Every single part of it has a connection to some other Marvel movie, and it's still grounded on the same design of what the other film has. And that's what's remarkable of it. It might look like it's a kaleidoscopic madness, just a random thing that they did in the computer, but it's not random at all. It's really well orchestrated. It has a very defined story beat as well. And I think that's why it's so remarkable and why it's so impressive, because, it starts with just him flying to the air, and then he comes down again, and then he goes into the dimensions. And I feel like that's shout out to storytelling there, because it's a really visual piece. Although she's talking and she's doing exposition, but I can hear Tilda Swinton talk forever. It's fine. I love her voice. It's fine. Yeah. She's amazing on this film. So
in this sequence too, it's always the great meeting of the different ways that Marvel tends to put huge sequences together, i.e. visual development with concept art and design from their own interior group. Then there's visual effects concept design as well during the post-process. There's animatics and previs. In this case, that was done by the third floor.
Yeah.
And then the visual effects work overseen by Steph Soretti was done by Method Studios.
Yeah.
In this case. So they really had a lot to tackle, all those different groups. We'll concentrate here on what Method ended up doing. But one thing that helped them, I think, Hugo, was that there were sort of predefined, what do we call those, dimensions or areas of the multi-dimensions?
Yeah, so this thing, this thing, again, shout out to Method Studios. VFX supervisor over there was Doug Bloom, and also there was an involvement by the visual effects designer, Oliver Dumont. They were together with Soretti, of course, they were the masterminds together with the amazing team behind compositing and CG on this. This sequence originally was supposed to be 7 minutes long, and that was one of the things that it was supposed to show more dimensions, which means there's other dimensions that it didn't even show, which is really funny to think. There's probably even more connections to other films in the future that Marvel is planning that we haven't even seen. And of course, let's not forget that this time we didn't have Loki yet, and so the TV show Loki connects to a lot of these things, but we didn't saw that yet at this time. It was supposed to be 7 minutes, and then ended up being cut to 2.5, 3 minutes. I think it's almost 3 minutes long. And it goes between 5 dimensions. It starts on what they call the speaker cone, which is when Doctor Strange goes through this cone and he explodes in particles. Then it goes into a biloom dimension. Again, I'm not making these up, okay? These are the names that they actually talk about on CineFX and on interviews. That's what they talk about. We go into the biloom dimension, which is like this kind of procedural spore-like spheres everywhere. Then we go to the mirror dimension, which you know so well. Even on the film, we go into the mirror dimension all the time, and we see a lot of Doctor Stranges everywhere. And then we go to the fractal equation, the fractal environments, the Mandelbrot as well, with the cave, the hands and the eyes and everything. And then especially the little hands are really creepy, going all the way.
Oh my gosh.
It's almost like a horror movie. That's where Scott really comes in, isn't it? It's really a horror moment. And then we go into the quantum realm, which we know from Ant-Man. And then wrap up on the dark dimension, which again, it's really cool because they show the final scene of this film almost on that part, because that's the first time you see what's his name? Dormammu?
Say that again.
I can't.
Dormammu.
Dormammu, yeah. Dormammu. I can't say it. I'm sorry.
Dormammu.
Yeah. We
Isn't
see
it?
him. Yeah, I think it is. Cumberbatch can say it
Hugo,
much
I
better.
thought we were cutting this out, but you're going to leave it in,
Of
aren't
course
you?
I am. Of course I am.
We can't say Cumberbatch and we can't say Dormammu.
This is what happens when you get a Portuguese and an Australian on a podcast.
I'm sorry.
Hey, I'm Portuguese. I'm not. I'm helpless. But yeah, we go through and then we actually end up by seeing this dude on the final dimension as well. So I don't even know where to start, Ian, because this thing is 5 films in one sequence. It's all seamless as well, which is really, really remarkable.
Look, the whole thing is designed as a trip.
Yeah.
And we keep saying psychedelic and LSD, but that is the influence here, is 2001: A Space Odyssey gone wild. And
the comic books. The comic books have this stuff all the time, especially Doctor Strange and also Silver Surfer. Those kind of comics had all these kind of moments.
Yeah. I think the thing that I remember taking away the most, if we had to concentrate on one thing, was some of the Mandelbrot fractals imagery. Because it came at a time when mathematics and visual effects and the rendering of these sorts of geometric shapes was absolutely possible, especially with Houdini setups.
Yeah.
And I mean, curiously, you could see it in other films that there was this short period of time where visual effects studios went nuts with Mandelbrots and fractals, you know. But here it worked because it is about multi-dimensions and multi-shapes and looking at shapes from different angles, and like it wasn't just a gag, is what I mean. It actually meant something, I felt.
Yeah. Well, this has to do also with the fact that the director and the DOP, both Scott and also the DOP, which Ben Davis, we've talked about him before as well, because he was the DOP of Eternals. We spoke about him, and I guess like he's also worked with Cerretti a few times now, because he was also the DOP of Guardian of the Galaxy. So it has to do with the fact that they were trying to make it as grounded as possible. I know it was an LSD trip and it was supposed to be like this crazy moment, but it was connected with reality, you know, like the The space sequence was very much inspired by NASA photographs and NASA spacewalks, and also like the Earth. Then we have, of course, like you said, the mathematical equations to do the fractal devices as well. And even like references with molecular photography, even skin cancer. There's like a moment on the sequence which he actually uses skin cancer cell as a reference to do the backgrounds as well.
Yeah.
So that is why it's so amazing, this sequence, because it's completely out there, almost borderline motion graphic piece, but it's photoreal and completely connected with molecular structures and molecular biology.
Sure.
And I think that's why it's so well achieved, you know.
Yeah. You mentioned grounded. I mean, Benedict appears in this sequence as a, as he's a digi-double when he had to be, but they did shoot a gimbal unit.
Yeah, they had a
wire
fork.
work.
Yeah, they had a fork.
Pushed
gimbal.
him around, that sort of thing.
Yeah, this was supervised by additional VFX soup Chris Shaw, like he was on the gimbal, the gimbal crew, I guess. It's like a fork gimbal, isn't it? Like he has like a fork around his. It's really difficult to move on these things because the actor has to have a lot of balance. And yeah, they really throw him out on the set on this thing. Yeah.
But I actually talked to the team about this sequence for a visual piece at VFX blog, my old website. The story is still up, so we'll put a link to it, where I talked to Steph, Third Floor, and Method. And when you watch this sequence, it appears to be highly complicated because it's meant to be. But to them, it was planned out. And as you mentioned, those different multi-dimensions, those different worlds, it was very clear where they went from each time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, although we think it's a super complicated sequence, I think by breaking it down like that, Method could get it done.
Yeah,
basically.
I know. Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. And also like, yeah, I know what you mean. Like it obviously, like you have to break it down on small steps and small tasks, otherwise you're never gonna get this thing done. But yeah, good that you've talked about the rig. Yes, they did use a lot of real shots from there, but obviously they had to do a lot of digi-double as well. And this was a very different digi-double as well, because they had to do the broken down, slimmer Cumberbatch version, because he was with the big beard, he was like a bit more broken down, a bit more like tired and depressed at that time. So this was that digi-double that did it. So they couldn't use the digi-double they did on the other sequences, which is much more buffed as well. And they had to do digi-double because there's gravity on this. Like he was flying around all over the place, and obviously as much as the gimbal can give some of it, it will never escape the grasps of gravity. You have to do a digital version so that the cloth flies around and his legs fly around and everything flies around. No, it's an amazing sequence, and it's really funny to see Scott talk about this sequence on the audio commentary, the director, and also like when you read cineFX and you see the interviews about this with Soretti and also with Method supervisors. This was a really different approach. They did a trial and error approach, because although they knew about all these 5 dimensions, no one really knew how they looked. You know what I mean? Like no one really knew exactly how can this look. And so a lot of this production, a lot of it was left on the editing bay, unfortunately. There's a lot of visual effect shots, completely VFX shots that are not in the film. The reason being because when you're doing these kind of effects, you kind of have to do it first, look at it and see it on the edit, and then see if it works. You can't just completely previs the whole exact thing, because it's such an experimental sequence. So yes, people might be, I noticed at the time people were like reacting to the fact that they were like doing so much work for nothing apparently. But I don't think it is true. Like I feel like this is the creative process that has to happen to get there, to get those kind of images. You need to fail and try and fail and try and fail and try and do a lot of trial and error and a lot of comping and a lot of VFX before you get the mood of the piece. I feel like
it's an exploration.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes, and by the way, Steph or Olivia from Method, who was at Method, if you've got those temp shots or, unfinished shots, very happy to have them on my hard drive. Whenever you want to send, go for it. I love seeing that sort of stuff. I was going to mention to Hugo, one of the interesting things about this sequence is, now we haven't seen the new Doctor Strange film yet, but we've seen some trailers.
Yeah.
And what I love about some Marvel films is that there's a certain effect done in one film, and then of course it's referenced in a later film.
Yeah.
In the trailers, we already see some multi-dimension, multiverse stuff. Like there's Strange with like chopped up like bits of his face and just other crazy things. I love that they just are able to, and they do take it further.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like almost a homage to the original, this LSD trip type thing. So I'm really excited to where they've gone next. And it is, 6 years down the road.
Yeah.
There have been developments with effect simulation, rendering, and other things that can be used to make it look even better. So I kind of like that with all the kinds of effects that get done in these Marvel films. You sort of see the progression just by the fact that new films are coming out.
Yeah. I know. And yes, of course it's going to look better because technology has evolved, and the scope is going to be big. It's not going to look better. The scope is going to be bigger. I think that's the word that we should use, because I think that this is flawless already as it is. It is photoreal. It is beautiful. And especially on IMAX, this thing, shout out to the team, because my God, this looks really pretty on IMAX, on HDR. But I know what you mean, because, again, Kevin Feige and his team, they know exactly what they have up the road with other shows and the other films. So they can get away with doing all those references that we will in 5 years from now know, oh, that was what that film was. Yeah. I'm sure at some moment we're going to see the other realms, because we see the 5 dimensions here, like the biolume and also the Cave of Hands. I'm sure we'll go back to them. Because obviously we're going to have another Ant-Man, and obviously we're going to have other films that will actually explore these ones, and then we will find out, oh, that was what that was. And that sense of discovery is really what, Marvel movies, of course, sometimes they're better, sometimes they're worse. I mean, not all of them are outstanding, but they're, as a whole, they've really change the way we have these kind of films. It's a universe. It's really a universe. Just like, I know a lot of people criticize that by making it sound like, oh, you have to watch all of them. That's the hook they have on you. But if people really, really were kids reading these comic books, well, as I was, when I was a young boy, they all were always like that. Marvel books were always like this. They always connected between themselves. There was guest appearances between the books, and the books would linger and continue and continue and continue for weeks and weeks and weeks and years to come. And sometimes another character would show up on another comic book and another strip, and then you would have event books that would be moments in the year where you had a big, big collection of heroes all gathering. So I feel this is the perfect transferring of what they've made on those books into film. I feel like, as much as people criticize sometimes, I feel they're just following the books. They're following Stan Lee's work, and they're following. Maybe when people criticize, maybe they didn't read those books, and maybe they didn't really knew a lot of things that were happening at that time. But it's always been like this. These comic books. So it's cool to finally see this happened for real. Because, man, I tell you, when I was young, when I was a kid, I never thought this was possible to even exist in the big screen, because visual effects were so different back then. And I know 2001 has a LSD sequence as well at the end, but it's nothing like this. This is just another level. It's nothing compared. Yeah.
Maybe just to wrap this up, Hugo, you mentioned something about this was a big Method Studios sequence, and of course Framestore's work led into it. But it works so well in these Marvel films that they have multiple vendors, because obviously Method did this. Luma did the Dormammu encounter at the end of the film. And then later on, ILM did a lot of the quantum realm in Ant-Man, for a final sequence there. So all these visual effects studios need to, they're driven by Marvel and the overall visual effects supervisor. But I always like that different vendors work on it, and it always looks slightly different, of course.
Yeah.
But, there's something nice and collective about that. And I just wanted to make sure I got that in there because I think it's the strength of these Marvel films, how all these, 12 vendors, 16 vendors, whatever, work together to ultimately deliver something.
Yeah.
It's kind of a nice part of these Marvel films.
It is. And especially on this film, shout out to all the artists that worked on this thing, because if you stick around for the credits, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of artists that contributed to this project. This is a big movie. It's only 2 hours long, but it's a big VFX movie, and so many vendors and so many artists, so many talented people that are working and delivering this. It is really, filmmaking these days is not it is the most collaborative art in existence. In the past, opera was probably the most collaborative art, but now it's filmmaking, it's film. It's by far the biggest combination of different art forms together in one single thing, and it's really exciting. And I love the pleasure of talking with you about these kind of things because it's really, really cool to see where it came from, especially when we deep dive into retro films, and then talk about where it's going, because it's I don't even know, and no one knows really where it's going, but it is becoming bigger and bigger and better and more incredible, and the sky is the limit. There's no limitations really of what these studios can make now. Their pipelines and their developments, not that innovation still exists, of course. I don't mean to be disrespectful. Obviously, in the retro films, there was more innovation because they were starting everything. And we still have a lot of innovation. But now that we've kind of invented everything, now we're just iterating better versions of it. And I love that. I really like that. I love to every week disconstruct this with you and really talk about the history and the future of this, so
yeah, same, Hugo. Well, Hugo, I love chatting to you about this every episode as well. Of course, it wouldn't really be possible without our sponsors and our Patreon supporters. They really make these episodes possible. If you're a Patreon supporter of Befores and Afters or Hugo's Desk, you actually get these episodes 3 days early and ad-free, which is really cool. And of course, our sponsors make our lives much easier too. So thank you so much.
Yep. And don't forget to check out our next episode as well, where we're going to deep dive even more into Doctor Strange. We're going to be talking about the New York sequence and the Hong Kong sequence in the end. And yeah, don't check it out. Don't forget. And also, of course, don't forget to check our first episode about Doctor Strange as well. We'll review the film as well. Yeah, thanks so much for listening, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.